One of the few highlights of Batman v Superman was the brief glimpses that we got of Wonder Woman. Sure, she was totally shoehorned in and could have been taken out with minor alterations, but it was our first time seeing the character in live action since the 70s TV series. Wonder Woman is an iconic superhero, so it was always strange that no one had decided to make a film about her. So when they announced the Wonder Woman standalone movie, many people were excited. However, with the track record that the DCEU had up till this point, it was easy to lose faith in the movie. I mean, no one wants to see a Wonder Woman movie expecting it to be bad, but... Martha! Why did you say that name? Yeah, hard to expect much after that. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt though. Let's take a look at Wonder Woman. We start off on the hidden island of Themyscira. This island is home to a group of Amazons created by the god Zeus to protect mankind from any impending threats. The only threat they know of is the son of Zeus and the god of war, Ares. Ares was defeated by Zeus many centuries ago, but the Amazons still train from a young age to prepare themselves for his return. One of these Amazons is Diana, the princess of the island. She trains in secret with her military general aunt for years until she finally receives her mother's permission. It's made clear throughout her training that there are certain differences between Diana and the other Amazons, and she possesses powers that she doesn't fully understand. While she contemplates her abilities, she sees a military plane crash into Themyscira's waters. She rescues the pilot, Steve Trevor, from the wreck, but soon finds herself face to face with a German invasion squad. The Amazons manage to fend the Germans off, but not before Diana's aunt is killed in the crossfire. The Amazons interrogate Steve Trevor, who tells them that he is an American spy and that he stole vital weapons information from the Germans. Trevor tells them about the war that has engulfed most of the world, and Diana is convinced that it is Ares' doing. In the middle of the night, Diana steals the God-Killer sword, the lasso of truth, and the iconic red and blue armor. She meets up with Steve Trevor and demands that he take her to the war, as she believes it will lead her to Ares and that she can defeat him once and for all. The story is very simple and definitely feels like it was based off an older source material, but it feels like it's beneficial to the movie because it starts off with a sort of antiquated charm. Of course, the story evolves into something more complex by the end of it, but it makes sense to start it off so simple. The plot thickens the more we see the world through Diana's eyes. We are shown the harsh contrast between where she comes from and where she goes. Because of this, we can see her understanding of the world around her progress alongside the story, and it's pretty effective. It doesn't just go from fantasy to harsh reality because the fantasy elements bleed into the real world in a way that feels organic and subtle. Wait, subtlety in a DC movie? What? In fact, this movie breaks a lot of traditions that the other DC movies followed. For example, there's fucking color. Ow! What is this island? It's too much color! Quick, play Daddy Snyder's version!
Darkness! No parents!
Oh, that was close. The only time this movie looks grim and dark is when we go to the war, but that makes sense. It's supposed to look bleak and hopeless. There are some shots that look a little too dark, particularly some of the nighttime shots, which, yeah, I know it's nighttime and all, but there are other night shots in this movie that look fine. And sure, maybe it could use a bit more color at times, but for the most part, I think the movie looks quite nice. Some of the CGI isn't that great, but it's not nearly as bad as Suicide Squad. Sometimes the effects are used in really nice ways, like when we learn the history of Themyscira. The whole thing is told via paintings and it looks fantastic. It's stylized and really complements the Greek god backdrop of the film. And despite this movie actually revolving around Greek gods, it's still far less on the nose about it than Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. The soundtrack to the movie is just gorgeous. This is one of the best superhero soundtracks I've heard in a while. The music carries almost every scene and saves many shots from just being seen as flat or boring. It could be so easy to see the shot of Diana swimming as nothing special, but with the music thrown in, it feels like something important is happening here. The music really shows in the beginning as it constantly feels like it's building up to a grand epic adventure. But when we get to the actual war, it's very somber and sad. It complements the contrast between peaceful Themyscira and the harsh real world very well. The Wonder Woman theme that was introduced in Batman v Superman comes in here, and while I do enjoy that theme, it is so stylistically different from the rest of the soundtrack that it does stand out quite a bit. It's by no means a negative really, as it does complement the action well, but it is a little jarring to go from well-composed strings to heavy guitars. Fortunately, the movie knows when to use these harsher music cues because they save it for the action scenes. The action is really well done and finds a great balance between looking like epic comic book action and being pretty intense. It's not a bloody movie by any means, but it's not afraid to show people being killed in some pretty intense ways. We get a great balance of your average wartime action mixed with some badass, upfront, and personal combat from Wonder Woman herself. Her fighting style is swift, improvised, and finds a good balance of looking both graceful and brutal. That's a combination I would not expect. They use a lot of slow-mo in some of the later action scenes, but unlike Suicide Squad, it looks pretty cool and is used to emphasize the impact of these blows. It can be overused sometimes, but I never really felt like the slow motion was detrimental to the action. The shaky cam is relatively restrained in the action scenes, and when it's used for the right reasons. It's used to keep this at a safe PG-13 rating, but aside from the lack of blood, it never feels like this movie is afraid to get dark. They don't shy away from showing the horror of chemical warfare and the suffering of those caught in the crossfire. It's not all grim though. Like Marvel movies, there's comedy in this, but not once does it feel like a cheap imitation. I never felt like I was watching a Marvel movie when I was watching this. This felt very DC. This felt more like the Nolan Batman trilogy. It never relies on cliches. Any of the comedy in this movie is all fueled by the characters and their interactions. The most shocking part of Wonder Woman is that almost all the characters are just fantastic. I'll start with Wonder Woman herself. Diana is just so likable. She is naive in the beginning, but she never comes off as stupid. She's been sheltered her whole life with her only knowledge of war being in fairy tales, so it totally makes sense that she would be convinced that Ares is behind the war. Of course she would simplify it so much because that's all she knows, and over the course of the movie, we feel her curiosity and her determination fuel all of her decisions. She doesn't care about politics or the words, she just wants to jump straight into the action. Obviously the situations are more complex than that, but it's easy for us to respect her willingness to do what it takes to stop the war. It would have been so easy to rely on the classic fish out of water cliches, but they never do. They do a couple of light jokes with it, but while Diana is naive, she's never dumb and is willing to adapt to her situation if it's within reason and leads her closer to her goal. But what makes her likable beyond that is how selfless and kind she is. She constantly wants to help people even when it's clear that she can't. The horrors of the war are so awful to her that she can't even walk through a trench without wanting to do something for every single person in there. And she's never doing it because she's told to. In fact, she's usually told not to for the greater good. She's doing it because she's a good person. And sometimes she listens and restrains herself, but it eats away at her until she can't take it anymore, and the next thing you know, she's storming the battlefield, and it's just badass. This scene is the best damn scene in the movie, and it perfectly shows what a hero Diana is. As the story progresses, we see her start to understand more and more that the world is not as black and white as she thought it was, and how her views on mankind change the more she sees both how good and how bad they can be. It's sad to see her slowly lose her faith in people as the movie progresses, and to see her reaction to losing an entire town's worth of people. You can see her filled with enormous grief, anger, and a thirst for vengeance. Gal Gadot does a great job of conveying all these emotions with little dialogue. She captures a lot of it with her face and pulls off everything. Even the action, despite how small she is, she manages to look like a fierce warrior in a lot of these scenes. When she is using her lasso, it's straight out of Castlevania, and it is fucking awesome. I never thought the glowing lasso could look so cool, but it does. Diana's origins are intentionally vague in the beginning of the film, and unlike Superman, she has an actual curiosity in her abilities and she uses them selflessly every time. Her interactions with Chris Pine's character are the most human interactions in the entire DCEU. It's never cringeworthy or on the nose. These just feel like real people. I didn't know if I would like Chris Pine in this movie, but I thought he was great. Steve Trevor is a lot like Diana in many ways. He's just as kind and selfless. However, in contrast to her, he is very grounded in the reality of the situation and is more submissive when he needs to be. He never feels like a weak link. He's just fighting the war the same way any normal person would. He teaches Diana a lot of regular world customs, but in a way that comes off as charming. He never feels like he's doing anything selfishly. The more he learns about Diana and her people, the more he is willing to put his faith in her, just as she puts her faith in him. They complement each other very well. Some of his deadpan delivery is just great. It's like he's so beaten down from how crazy things have gotten that he'll just accept the next bit of randomness thrown at him with no questions.
I had no father. My mother sculpted me from clay and I was brought to life by Zeus.
Well, that's neat.
I love this little moment where he ties the lasso of truth to himself to prove to Diana that he isn't lying. It's a good showcase of his honor. I really respect his determination to stop the war and his willingness to learn. He watches how the Amazons use teamwork to fight in Themyscira and uses the same technique later to help Diana, and I love how he never feels like her babysitter. He always feels like a companion. He doesn't yell at Diana to get out of the line of fire. He has faith that she knows what she's doing, and he goes to move the mission forward while she has the bad guys distracted. Their chemistry is so good that I never questioned that these two would fall in love. Even if it is about as long as a Disney romance, they grow together so much over such a short time that it makes sense. Any arguments they have are not because they dislike each other, it's because they have two different views on how to solve the same problem, and I respect that Steve is still willing to do what he thinks is right, even if he has to do it on his own. He is one of the best superhero love interests in any superhero film. His little band of brothers we get introduced to is full of likable people. The group is a good mix of people with different backgrounds, but it's never brought up in a way that feels like it's made a big deal of. The few times it's brought up is to teach Diana something. For example, the guy who wants to be an actor tells Diana that what's held him back from following his dreams is his skin color. He lets her know that even without a conflict as obvious as war, everyone is still fighting their own personal battles. The Native American guy informs Diana that his people were made homeless by Steve's people, but when you see him and Steve fight together, it tells her that people are willing to put the past behind them. Sure, it may seem like basic concepts to us, but to Diana, it's fleshing out a world she doesn't fully understand, and they don't overly explain it. They hint at it and move on. The actors are able to show faces that look deep in thought and convey all the emotion. This group of people have a real camaraderie among them, and they do feel like good friends. And much like Steve, they quickly put their faith in Diana's abilities and welcome her with open arms. They have the same drive to do good that Steve and Diana have, and they each have a different talent that comes into play in the story. It honestly makes me a little sad when you see the photo that was taken of them and realize that these guys are all dead now, because they really are a charismatic group of people. The villains of the movie aren't bad, but not great either. General Ludendorff is just kind of the average evil German guy we come to expect in old war films. He wants the war to keep continuing even though the Germans are about to surrender, and he's willing to kill his own superiors in order to keep the conflict alive. The most interesting thing about him is that he's based off a real character of the same name. That's really weird. But Diana thinks he's the human version of Ares and is determined to kill him. Beyond that though, he's pretty forgettable. Dr. Poison is a bit more interesting. She's just an insane person who loves creating new ways of poisoning people. Her design is simple but kind of cool, and part of me enjoys the sick pleasure she gets from creating these weapons. She is not interesting past that though, and kind of just disappears by the end of the movie. I've been mostly positive about this film so far, and if you're wondering if there are any negatives, there are, but they are all in the climax. I don't think these flaws kill the movie by any means, but they do take it down a bit. The climax of the film devolves into a lot of CGI, a weak villain, and some really lame dialogue. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of good in the climax, but this was the only time where the flaws took a toll. I can't talk about them without spoiling the twist, so skip here if you want to avoid them. So Diana kills Ludendorff only to find out that the real Ares was the man who funded her and Trevor's mission. He reveals to Diana that he is not the cause of war, but the inspiration. He doesn't tell people to fight, but influences how they fight. This is cleverly shown in an earlier scene where he blows some papers to Dr. Poison, and it inspires her to make a powerful gas. I like that a lot. He doesn't cause the negativity in mankind, he feeds it. It's a great way to have him be involved in the war without making mankind totally innocent. He also reveals that Diana is actually the daughter of Zeus and that she has been the true god killer all along. He then tries to persuade her to join him in destroying mankind to restore the earth to the peaceful paradise it once was. Hey Zod, take notes. See? He's showing her pretty things, not dead people. Maybe that'll help your plan, you fucking idiot. Anyway, she refuses his offer and the two of them have a CGI fight that's not bad, but it isn't very good. Part of me respects that they kept him as his old man self for much of the fight, but when he covers himself in the armor, then it becomes a little weird. I don't think it's because of his age, I think it has more to do with his mustache. Now, don't get me wrong, I respect the fuck out of this man's magical mustache, but when I think of a Greek god, I think of a beard. If he had a beard, I think they could have pulled this off way better. We have a great moment where Steve leaves Diana and sacrifices himself to save the world, and this is the part where the climax loses me. Diana has her big moment, breaks free from Ares and just kind of goes on an angry rampage, and it's really hammy in the way that it's shot. It's made worse that Ares is giving a speech the whole fucking time on how people suck and no one went to his Little League game and that cranberry juice is never on sale, and it's just annoying. We had a great character do a great selfless sacrifice, and it's followed by a really terrible villain speech written by a teenager with some hammy action shots. And I don't get his speech at all. He's using Steve's sacrifice as a way to show Diana that people are bad and don't deserve her, but he's doing this after someone did the ultimate thing to prove that people can be good and decent. What sense does that make? And then she gives a speech on why people are good before killing Ares, but then loses faith in people and goes into hiding for the next 100 years. It's really weird. It's almost like they had to end it this way in order to properly tie it into the rest of the DCEU, which I can't really blame this movie for because it is still part of that universe, but it's a universe that sucks, and the majority of the movie is so far removed from the rest of the DCEU that I don't think that this was needed. None of this kills the movie, but it is enough to drag it down a bit by the ending, which is one of the worst places it could falter since that's everyone's last impression of the film. With all that said, Wonder Woman is still an excellent movie. It's the dark horse in the DCEU, but for all the right reasons. It does the opposite of what all the other movies did. It has very real and likable characters, good action, a fantastic soundtrack, and a lot of great themes. It has mediocre villains and does falter a bit in the climax, but the rest of the movie is so good that it overcomes that, and I still feel pumped and hopeful by the end of it. The final score for Wonder Woman is a 9 out of 10. This is just a great movie, and I want to be clear, this is not just a good movie for the DCEU. This is not being graded on a scale. This is just a solid superhero movie that's better than a lot of the Marvel movies, and it's easily the best DC movie I've seen since The Dark Knight. I really love that they finally gave a great standalone superhero film for women in a way that never felt like they were pushing an overly feminist agenda. I've always thought that the best way to push any agenda is by not trying to push it at all. In this movie, Wonder Woman always felt like an awesome character that could be seen as a feminist icon, and that's how you do it. Don't give me a character and tell me why they're important. Give me a great character and I'll figure the rest out for myself. This is the first movie in the DCEU that has been legitimately good, and I hope this is the point where they realize what they should be doing. I guess a lot of great things can happen when you see a photo of someone important. I haven't forgotten you. You could climb anything. Hey guys, if you enjoy my content, then you should follow me on Twitter, where I post channel updates and information on upcoming videos. You can find the link in the description. Thanks for watching.